Yeah, I'm gonna wait till 124.
I went and saw my,
Oh, yeah, that wasn't even a pint, that was like a half pint.
that's so sad. I walked in and I haven't seen him in 28 years. And I walked in and he goes, Tom. I hated to. He was so mean.
Yes. That's right.
She's really good.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for asking. Spunky and
Yes. You can get extra copies with the drugs, amazing. Yeah.
You want the skunk to come back, right?
oh yeah.
Yeah, good to go.
Welcome everyone to our Logan Municipal Council meeting for January 17th. It's 5:30, we're calling this meeting into order. Our opening ceremony is by Isaiah Jones, the new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Senior Director at UT State University.
Is there a junior director? Or just?
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Is that pretty good? Usually the mic is off. Some of the people know this that saw me last week not know how to work the microphone. So, yeah, as Ernesto said, I am the new director at USU, but I've actually lived here as a small kid. My sister was born here in the 90s, and then we left. I came back to USU in 2009 for what I thought was a business trip. But then I got married, played football here.
Surprise.
Now I shop at Lee's. It's just a quick thing that happens. So, but I've been asked, thank you all for having me. I've been asked just to say kind of a little brief bit about Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And I was going to tie it into one of his sermons. As some of you know, I try not to be late after work, so like the kids to bed. And never to preach, but I might mess up one of those. So hopefully I stick to the script. Okay, so Martin Luther King Jr., obviously the day just passed, and it's a very interesting holiday. When it was first proposed, as many of you might know, it was 1960s or 1968. It was first proposed the day he was assassinated. Of course, this took up until about 1983, when Ronald Reagan actually signed a bill to get it passed. What's interesting, I don't know how many of you have heard of Stevie Wonder. I hope you've heard of him. If not, you're missing out. But the whole Happy Birthday song that he sings, Happy Birthday to you, that song. That was a lot to campaign to make Martin Luther King Jr.'s Day a holiday. And so, although it was passed and went through in 1968, specifically January the 20th, it wasn't observed in all 50 states, including the great state of Utah, until the year 2000. Lots of contention leading up to it. Some wanted it to be combined with General Robert E. Lee's holiday and so forth. So that was Alabama. But the main thing is, I think there's a few words that are helpful for us to meditate on today, and I'll be brief. So, King writes a series of sermons. So he's speaking to a church audience in the 1960s. It's the collection of these sermons are called "The Strength to Love," and the foreword is by his wife, Greta Scott King. And the opening sermon that I want to focus on is called "A Tough Mind and a Tender Heart." He starts out his sermon saying, "Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves." That's the gospel according to Matthew, not me. And he starts from there. And what he's really wrestling with is something that I think is manifest today, especially of those, I know we've tried to forget COVID-19. But we all saw a similar thing. And what he saw was a tension that existed in the American South. And it was a tension between religion and science, the universities and the community, all sorts of areas of human life. And he thought that because the community hadn't learned to live with these tensions, it manifested itself as violence. And so for King, he thought that the combining of what he called a tough mind and a tender heart would lead to a better community where they could still make changes without violence and upheaval. So he says here, quote, "There's little hope for us until we become tough-minded enough to break loose from the shackles of prejudice, half-truths, and downright ignorance. The shape of the world today does not permit us the luxury of soft-mindedness. A nation or a civilization that continues to produce soft-mindedness in folks purchases its own spiritual death on an installment plan." So he had a sense of humor. The thing that I want to focus on is what exactly does King see happens when the tough mind, right? So usually I come from the university, we're very good at helping students articulate. Can you describe the world? Can you look at things? Can you understand things? The other side of that King thought is we no longer knew how to have conversations about our common values, or what he called our ultimate concerns. Probably saw that in COVID as well, right? We had evidence and things, but we also weren't sure how to collectively talk about it. So for King, what comes together when we mix the tough mind and a tender heart? He calls it, in the Latin, it's misericordia, or in the Greek, eleison. In English, it's mercy. And mercy, in its classical root, has a sense of ointment being poured out on the wound. And in Latin, it has a sense of sharing the heart of the other as other. A sense of when someone else is suffering, the result is compassion. But he wasn't just talking about particular acts, right? Someone is hungry, I give them soup. Someone can't log in, I give them Wi-Fi. He also wanted us to ask questions, why don't they have those things? That's probably what led him to his death. He starts looking into causes. But I think one of the things that can be really helpful as a community, and something I think in my position that I hope to help out with, is starting to bring together those two things, our ultimate concerns as a community, and also our sense of the science, the sense of the university, the academy, and bring those things together so that we can flourish. Because as we all know, USU exists in the community. So that's what I open us up to in thinking about this holiday. It's just that sense of how the community, the university, us as individuals, as people, it tells us to start to ask, look around both in ourselves and in the community where there's wounds and how we might go about healing them. So thank you.
Thank you. Would you lead us?
Yes. So now, if we will all rise to the flag here. I will now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isaiah. Thank you for joining us. Important questions to ask, right? Important questions to ask. Hopefully someday we'll have better answers to those questions. I'll entertain a motion to accept our minutes and approve our agenda, unless you guys have comments about.
I would move acceptance of the minutes and approval of tonight's agenda.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll proceed with our agenda then. Just a reminder for our community, our regular meetings are the first and the third Tuesdays of every month at 5:30, and our next meeting will be February 7th. Now is the time for any community member, any person in our audience who would like to comment or ask questions about items that are not in our agenda for tonight. If you'd like to come up to the mic and state your name and your place of residence, please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less.
Hi, I'm Matthew Fakrothi, live here in Logan. I just had a question. I wasn't sure exactly where to go to ask it exactly, but it's more of a finance question, I guess. So, what do you guys maybe? But in the budget for last year, this year, and next year, it says in the elections that there's nothing being, there's nothing being spent on ads and publications. I was just wondering what exactly ads and publications actually entails and why nothing is being spent on that, especially during an election year.
So every other year is an election year.
Okay.
And so you'll see a budget in there every other year.
So it's
I'm
not
not
something
exactly
that's
sure
being
what this-
done like concurrently throughout the year to make sure that people are informed throughout the year about anything?
No,
What
the
exactly does it? Sorry, yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was just curious about exactly like what kind of information is publicized and advertised in that budget.
Teresa can talk to it, but can speak to the details. However, that budget is for performing the election, not for getting word out about other kinds of.
Okay, so where would I look for that kind of stuff then? Do you know?
I don't know, about the election.
Yeah, no, just like if you were to see how much money is spent on letting people know inside of the town that there's even an election going on in the first place.
I mean, all of that would be in that same area, and so not during election year. We
And
wouldn't
it
have
is an
any
election
services.
year, but there's no information yet to send out yet. I don't have any information to send. It is an election year in 2023, and information will be going out, but there's no information yet.
Okay, and so then given the stuff that's in like the special, or what was it, special departmental supplies, it seems like to be the majority of everything. Is that just stuff that hasn't been like, or just random stuff?
That would be all the postage, buying the envelopes,
Yep, all of that's in there. all
With the
of
ballots.
and I think we pay Cache County now to do much of that, so all of it just appears there. In the past, we did, when we put on our own elections, we did kind of categorize it differently. However, now we're just paying Cache County to do it, we just pay a special department supplies.
Okay, cool. That's it. My question. Thank you.
And all the information about the election will be posted on the website
Cool.
as information comes out about that. So you're welcome to call me or email me, and I will get that information out to you.
Sound good? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to address the council or mayor? If not, we will continue with our agenda. And now's the time for mayor and staff reports.
All right, I just have one agenda item tonight. Both the city and the county each appoint one sort of representative to the Airport Authority Board. Brett Hughey was appointed to fill an unexpired term, and it is now time to reappoint him. If the council so desires, that would be my recommendation. He's affiliated with a company that uses the airport significantly, so he has some very firsthand experience, especially as we're working on a new master plan for the airport. So I would recommend to the council that you would ratify Brett Hughey as a member of the Airport Authority Board. And Jeannie is actually our council representative on that board, and she has some experience in aviation. So anyway.
I would so move that we approve Brett.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
That's all.
All right. Next up, planning commission update.
Certainly, Planning Commission was almost a record last Thursday. They went for 4 hours. So
That's all.
I give them credit for that one. That was a long meeting. Black Rifle Coffee Company will be coming to the January 26th meeting. They requested a continuance. They approved 2 wireless towers that are 120 feet high. That is a lot higher than our normal. And both of them are connected to the sheriff's office, and one of them is at the fairgrounds, and the other one is behind the sheriff's office out on Valley View Highway.
What is the reason they're so much higher?
They needed them so they would have line of sight for communications reasons. So they didn't want any interruptions with trees and everything else. So yeah, it's pretty tall. So
The antenna's at the radio station.
it's very tall, and they will have to have they'll have to have blinkers on them for airplanes, for aircraft. So they're tall enough for that. The other item that they discussed was a rezone on Canyon Road from MR6 to mixed residential low MR12. That will come to us with their recommendation. The Logan Institute of Religion is, in my opinion, sadly, tearing down their old building on campus and replacing it with quite a large structure with underground parking. There was some concern with fire access and the fact that everything is going to go out on one very small Darwin Avenue. And so there will be no left turns out of Darwin onto 7th East, 7th North, yeah. Whatever's that corner, 8th East and 7th North, it'll only be a right in, right out on Darwin Avenue, and they're going to put up some jersey barriers to prevent people from thinking they can, do this. So, anyway, there was a lot of discussion about that in terms of traffic management. Altitude came for a subdivision permit to do some additional, to do 3 new building lots for 751 multifamily units at 2100 South and 800 West. That was approved. Then there were several land development code amendments that will come to us. So I won't go through all of those, but look for those pretty soon. And last but not least, they had a request from a developer to do a workshop on our new mixed-use ordinance because they have a piece of property that they requested to be rezoned mixed-use, and now they don't know exactly how they can develop it because of where it sits. So it was an interesting discussion in terms of just the Planning Commission trying to think through the ordinance itself and how it could be implemented on a particular piece of property which happens to be skinny and long. And so because of some of the things that we put into the mixed-use ordinance, commercial would be required along all the buildings that face the length of the property. And so that was a design challenge for them. So they discussed some various alternatives, and we'll see what happens. So it was a nice discussion for them, but it did make them be really tired and go late. So.
Thank you for everyone that was there. Sat through 4 hours of that.
So are we ready for all of the building demolition from the LDS Institute to come to our landfill?
That is, and again, we've been working on some potential direct hauls, so I'll ask Issa how far we've gotten in that process. I mean, the demolition is very imminent, correct?
Yeah, I think it's starting like in a week because they know they had lots of nonprofits.
Do they have demolition permits already in place?
I don't know, Jeff.
My little company's doing it.
They won't demolish quite as much as they're going to build. That much I can say.
I know they were looking to get rid of 2 9-foot slate pool tables, so if there's any nonprofit out there that needs a pool table, they were still looking to get rid of those last
And they're
year.
also removing 1 surface parking lot and removing 1 access point on 8th East. So it'll be an interesting change. So.
Thank you, Jeannie. Next up, we have our action items. And first up, we have a public hearing for our CDBG 2023 Annual Action Plan.
Yay for Amanda.
Okay, hello. This presentation is to initiate the annual action plan cycle for program year 2023. The annual action plan defines funding allocations for 2023. Allocations are based on priorities adopted in the 2019 through 2023 consolidated plan. Some considerations for public infrastructure and facilities are what areas of the city should be emphasized, what types of projects would the city like to accomplish. For nonprofit service support, are there specific services that are lacking that CDBG could help? Are there programs that need support? Are there particular groups of people who are in need of service? And for planning, are there planning projects that should be given consideration? Priority number 1 is to contribute to infrastructure or facility improvements. The funding goal is 50% over the 5-year plan, 40% to infrastructure, and 10% to the removal of access and mobility barriers. Some examples are sidewalks, curb and gutter, park improvements, community gardening or gathering areas, improved lighting, and traffic calming measures. The estimated funding goal at the end of year 4 is 57%, 50% infrastructure, and 7% access and mobility.
Is that our funding goal, or is that the reality of where we are at?
Right, where we will be estimated.
At the end of year for this year?
Yes.
To comply with the 5-year, correct?
One more year.
Yeah, so it's that percentage, so that overall over the 5 years, we're in compliance with our goal.
Yeah. Priority number 2 is to support social services, nonprofits, or neighborhood initiatives that address community needs for low to moderate income residents. The funding goal is 30% over the 5-year plan, 20% for facility improvements, and 10% for service improvements. Some examples: domestic abuse programs, volunteerism programs, integration of the immigrant community, senior home care programs, job training initiatives, transitional housing units, public transit services, affordable programming for kids, and basic financial management classes. The estimated funding goal at the end of year 4 is at 18%, 12% facility, and 6% service. Priority number 3 is to contribute to administration and planning. The funding goal is 20% over the 5-year plan, 15% to admin, and 5% to planning. The admin covers 1 full-time employee to administer the program, and planning covers any project planning costs. The 2023 application period will begin tomorrow, January 18th, and it runs through February 16th at 5 p.m. There will be an application workshop held on January 23rd and 27th that will cover the application and the selection process, as well as go over some CDBG basics. The steering committee will meet on March 7th to go over the applications received and make funding recommendations to the City Council. A draft annual action plan will be made available for public review on April 15th. The public comment period runs from April 15th through May 16th, following the public hearing and the adoption of the annual action plan by City Council.
Amanda,
Yes.
the application workshop, is that only for the applicants, or are we supposed to be there as well?
You don't need to be there. It's for the applicants, any potential applicants,
Thank you.
or anybody with any questions, I suppose.
How are they finding out about this workshop?
I have a contact list through the CIC, who I've sent emails to regarding the application period and the workshop and the dates. And it was noticed in the paper as well on our website, but mainly the emails.
And CIC is the Cash Interagency Council. It
Yes.
represents, I want to say there's 100 and something nonprofits that receive emails through that organization.
Correct. That's it. Any questions? Any more questions? That's it.
Thank you, Amanda. This is a public hearing. If you'd like to comment on this specific item, please come up to the mic, state your name and your place of residence. And keep your comments to 3 minutes or less, please.
My name is Susie Larson. I own Susie Senior Companionship Services. I'm based out of Layton, Utah, but we have a group, a fantastic group that runs here out of Logan and the whole Cache County. My hope is coming to you today is that I can apply for some of this money. I've been doing this for 12 years and went nonprofit 2019 because there's a need for assistance. It seems like we get older and seniors fall in that category where they're too rich for the poor and too poor for the rich. And it's hard for them to get services without debating everything they've ever owned. So with our company, we're asking that we want to apply for a wheelchair accessibility van. We've noticed over the last year that getting reliable and safe transportation is really hard, and especially one with a van. I know here in Logan, you guys have a great transportation service, but it doesn't work really well if they need to leave the city. And so we've had calls that individuals, I met with your mayor a month ago, so she knows some of this, where individuals want to go to family parties and they can't get their family members there because they need to go in a wheelchair. And a lot of our services, we do work after hours and holidays. And we really try hard to help accommodate that, you know, get individuals to church and various social activities. We also have clients up here that need to see medical, which is outside the city, especially down in Ogden. The KD is a big area that a lot of people go down for medical, as well as all the way down to Salt Lake, which is, you've got your Huntsman and the UP, which people go down to as well as Farmington, with the cancer center they have there as well. So my hope is that I can apply for some of this money. I'll be honest, the van I would like to get would be a wheelchair accessibility with the back entry that I can put in 2 wheelchairs. But those vans run for $98,000. And I know that's outside probably my realm of what I can ask for. But I'm very happy to get a used one. And I can usually get those between, if I'm lucky, between $48,000 to $60,000. So it's a little bit cheaper. But that is my goal today, and I will be applying for that and hope for the best. Thanks.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Or, no. All right. Anyone else that would like to address the council?
Dr. Gail B. Ghost. I have a question about new nonprofit organizations who've come about, if they're now on your list, like the Women's Center. I'm part of the Homeless Council, and I'm very interested in making sure that there are facilities and services for homeless families and individuals. So is that on your list of mail out?
I think they are on the contact list of the Cash Interagency Council.
Amy says
They are.
Okay,
They're aware of it.
thank you. I just needed to ask the question.
Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Yost.
Hi, my name is Joshua Gardner, and I do live here in Logan on 500 West, 55 South. Amanda knows me rather well, who's been calling for a few years now. But what I've tried to request for years now, and this goes back to 2015, 2014, I was in front of you guys. Different group back then, but the curb and gutter on my side of the street and on the opposite side of the street, it stops at the north edge of my house and doesn't pick up until the brand new accessibility corner that was just put in last year. Problem with that is, there's a lot of problems. One of the problems in the winter is that accessibility access area becomes unusable because the plow refuses to come over to my corner, over to the curb, because there's no road, and the plows will not plow where there's no road. They'll bury the plow in 2 seconds. So what happens is there ends up being a 6-foot area between where the curb would be and where they'll stop plowing, where snow is just not removed in the winter. I go out with my tractor and I will plow it, but I don't feel that that's really my responsibility to plow the road for the city, or to plow that access area and around my house and stuff. Also, because that area lies on a hill, in the spring, summer, whenever we get any rain, snow runoff, That all comes right down, picks up all that silt water, hits the curb, and ends up either covering the curb, or it will flow down my approach into the sidewalk and create a nice giant pile of silty sand. So what I'm requesting is that the council take, or that the CDBG grant and take a look at the area, because it is less than 200 feet worth of approach, curb and gutter. There are two approaches that need to be done for that corner, for my side of the corner to be considered finished. The other side has a similar, about 120 feet. But by doing so, it does finish that entire area, since the accessibility areas were just poured. And I know firsthand that the people there are not able to handle the cost of that kind of thing on their own. They've been, they were approached before, well, the corner lot has, and they just, like, the cost now, especially with inflation, is just prohibitive for any member to have to pay to put in that city-owned property curb and gutter. So
what was the address, the intersection again?
Sorry, what?
What was the intersection?
500 west, 200 south to 255 south.
Okay, thank you.
I have talked with Hart, I've talked with Jed before him. They have some discretionary funding that they can use for projects like this as well, but it is, with him, it's definitely a matter, just like with you guys, it's a matter of priorities versus how many are served, how many can be helped by whatever they're doing. And it's, my corner has, from everything I've heard, hit the short list for about a decade now, but that short list just keeps getting longer, and apparently the project just is not kicked down, it just gets kicked down every year. So that's all I have to ask for, and I don't know if there are other meetings that I can attend. I mean, normally the normal meetings are for applicants for the non-public works parts, from my understanding, more the business side of things than the sidewalk curb and gutter. But if there are other meetings that I would be invited to attend for that, I would be happy to show up for them. I want to get this taken care of. It just seems like such a small project that could be done fairly easily, and it's just probably never going to get done unless I keep being squeaky.
Thank you, Joshua, for bringing this up.
Thank you.
Isn't the March 7th meeting open to the public? The steering committee meeting, so that is open to the public, correct?
Yeah, but it doesn't have public comment.
Right, but it is open to the public.
Right. And you guys are the decision makers.
Anyone else?
We also have to have the projects in front of us to decide on.
Right, so you have the whole scope, right? Yeah.
Anyone else would like to comment on this item? All right, I'll bring it back to the council. We don't have to vote on this, correct?
We need to close the public hearing and then
No action.
no action, right?
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and close this. Thank you, Amanda, for presenting this. Our next public hearing is for Resolution 23-01, presented by Richard Anderson, budget adjustments.
Many items to consider. The first is a request to appropriate $20,000 of EMS reserves toward EMS equipment inventory. Or inventory equipment, it's really a vending machine. And we discussed that previously. That was one way they had.
Don't say it's just a vending machine.
Well, it's a drug vending machine.
Okay, thank you. Because otherwise it sounds frivolous.
It's for candy bars.
Yeah, it helps keep track for billing purposes too, so that
All
we
of
can
that as
ensure that supplies are billed for appropriately.
And yes, and that they're used appropriately.
Next is a request to appropriate $14,179 state grant funds for the purchase of body cameras for the police department. Request to appropriate $151,800 for public safety mental health support grant from the state. Request to appropriate $145,000 and one for a Parks and Recreation grant to be used for the Willow Park Sports Complex. request for $53,433, also a Parks and Rec grant from the Cache County Trails Department for a trail crossing, I believe, pedestrian crossing. $3,318, a grant from the Justice Department for cases worked by our police department's reimbursement, as well as a request to reimburse $21,418 for overtime shifts for our police department doing various things around the community. Lastly is a request to appropriate $185,525 for Wild Island fire reimbursements, and that should close out our past fire season.
Thank you, Richard. Any questions for?
Just curious, what's the improvement at the park?
Willow Park?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want us to address that?
That's the $145,001 grant.
The $1.
$1 comes from the split that we have with the grant. It's a matching grant. It's for improvements to replace 2 infields. That'd be 4 infield complex at Willow Park, and backstops and dugouts. And if there's enough money, we'll replace the asphalt on the interior of those ball fields.
I thought those ball fields had asphalt for those.
We thought about just trading.
I remember talking about this 2 years ago. So.
Yeah. They've had some drainage issues, and again.
They need a little love.
Yeah, they do.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions before I open it up to the public? This is a public hearing. If you would like to comment on this specific item on the agenda, please come up to the mic and state your name, your place of residence, and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Not everyone at once. All right, I'll bring it back to the council.
I'll move resolution, acceptance of resolution 2301.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Please say
Aye.
aye. Aye.
Sorry, jumped again.
Any opposed?
Ernesto, could I ask a related but random question? Mayor, are we still supporting the trails coordinator?
Yes,
Okay. We've
we've been doing that every year.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to know.
Right, resolution 23-01 passes. Our next action item is a public hearing for ordinance 23-01. Craig, do you want to give us a quick summary of what the change is in the?
Sure. Yeah, this is just a cleanup amendment to align our practice with code. It just provides a mechanism for the council to cancel or reschedule a regularly scheduled meeting during the month. And the practice has been that hold one meeting in July and one in December. So it's just cleanup work.
We got it.
Yeah.
All right.
Well presented last.
And we do have to hold a vote for this, right?
That's public hearing.
All right. This is a public hearing for this ordinance 23-01. If you would like to comment on this, please come up to the mic and state your name. I'll bring it back to the council.
I move we approve ordinance 23-01.
I'll second.
Arm wrestle.
Arm wrestle.
All right, it's being moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ordinance 23-01 passes. That is it for our action items. We only have one workshop item, and it is budget adjustments. Resolution 23-02. Rich?
Right, these require a little bit of explanation. The first item is a request for $75,977 for what is called a subscription-based information technology agreement. So there's a new nerdy accounting pronouncement that came out that basically said, if you have a subscription-based agreement with a software company, let's say you're going to use their software for 5 years. Well, let's use this example. That you're going to use a software company for 3 years. That's the agreement. You'll pay them $35,000 the first year. Second year, you pay them $40,000, and the third year, you pay them $40,000. Now you have to accumulate all of that into one transaction. Basically, call it a $25,000, $120,000 transaction. Capitalize it in the year that you go into the agreement, and then amortize it over the next 3 years. Similar to leases.
Okay, your favorite thing.
My favorite thing. This one is worse. This one has a lot of problems, and I really super duper hate it. However, I'm just an accountant guy. I don't make the rules, I just follow them. So we're here to try to follow this agreement.
You can just hope that every other accountant guy or girl hates it as much as you and they change it.
I think they do, and I think they will. This one will be changed. The reason is that $35,000 and the $40, if you can't determine how much of that is related to software, how much of that is related to support, how much of that is related to enhancement, you capitalize the entire thing. Now, from a nerdy accounting standpoint, that means we are capitalizing future service, which is just ridiculous. However, again, we can't really get out of this. In the past, and we've had this Esri software for 27 years. Every year previous to this pronouncement going out, we simply budgeted for $35,000 to pay the current year bill. Next year we budget for 40, and the following year we budget for 40. Now, we have to make sure council's on board with the full contract being gone into and the software being purchased that year that it was signed. In some ways that sounds good because we're making future commitments and maybe we ought to take that into account. In other ways there are lots of problems with it. So this contract was signed in July. And we have been trying to gather up all of these around the city. We're up to like almost 100 of these agreements. Most of them are extremely short and it's not a big deal. Some of them extend over longer periods of time. I've had conversations with our auditors who agree that this is not good. But we also agree that we don't write the laws, we just follow them, and so we're trying to follow it. Long story made a little longer. What we're here to appropriate is the next 2 years worth of that agreement. Then we will capitalize it and advertise it over the life of it. Now, I would typically, the way this should be done is we should be coming to council saying, hey, we've got this agreement, we would like to go into this agreement. Help us go into this agreement and appropriate the funds. However, because we catch these sometimes after the fact, and we're trying to put procedures in place where we'll catch them on beforehand, but we're catching them behind, we're coming to council saying, please ratify what has already happened and what has happened for the last 27 years. We just have to account for it differently moving forward. And so we're going to try to do this appropriately. However, it's going to be really, really hard.
And it just makes budgeting more difficult because then you have a big, a big spike in your expense where you're really using it over 3 years and normally you'd prorate it.
Yeah, if we know about this during the budget process, we can calculate it and put it as part of the budget. But that's going to very rarely happen because not only do we have two $40,000 payments that we are bringing back and capitalizing, you can see that the number is $75,977. That's because that is the present value of those future payments.
Oh, geez, Louise.
It's even worse.
Oh, man.
So it's pretty complicated. I think we're just going to have to agree that we're going to try to be as transparent as we can be. We have lots of pieces of software we use as a city. This is one. Now, of those 80 to 100 contracts we've been able to find, 3 of them meet the definition of what is called a SPITA, subscription-based information technology agreement.
Is it just for information technology?
It's
not for like golf carts?
It is not. Golf carts would come under a lease, and so that one is in place. But as they were dreaming up that pronouncement, somebody got the wild idea that, hey, sometimes people buy software over time. How is that fair? Well, let's capitalize that too. But they took the next step, illogical step of saying, if they can't define out those pieces that are clearly not capital, they have to call it all capital. And that was a mistake. It was a purposeful mistake because I think they realized if they went the other way and said, if you can't separate it out, don't worry about it, no one would separate it out ever, because this is very difficult. Now, just make just a hair longer because council needs to understand. If we're bringing this to council right now, what we'd say is $35,000 is in the budget. $75,977 is the present value of future payments. The source for the $35,000 is our annual budget that we've passed. The source for the $75,977 is future financing. And so this really doesn't affect us from a cash flow standpoint because it's future cash flow, but that's how we're going to have to account for it. So anyway.
So you're really, really encouraging young people to go into city financing with this conversation that you just shared, right?
We're encouraging you to avoid this like the plague. And when we can't avoid it, we'll bring it to council on the forehand, we hope.
Okay.
But you're saying that we're required to do this?
We are, as are all other communities, and our external auditors who come and audit us, they haven't got to the point that they can even contemplate this because they're still dealing with all the past pronouncements. Most cities are not looking at this yet, but they will be in the future.
So we will vote on whether we obey the law or not.
That's really what we're voting on. And I hope.
Tom, are you feeling rebellious?
For that item, that's really what we're saying.
We're voting on whether we do that in the present value, not in the future value.
So when the time for the actual payment comes, we'll have another item on our.
That'll be a budget one. I'll just.
Yeah, we haven't quite figured out exactly how to deal with that because, in essence, council is saying it's okay to make those future payments as well. Now, there is a little caveat that says, like all obligations that require future appropriation, they can't bind the council. So council is not bound by this budgetary thing. You still have the opportunity to pass next year's budget. And if, for whatever reason, you decide, you know what, that $40,000, we're getting rid of it, that'd be really bad. But we do not have that, we do not have to fulfill that obligation in the future. That council's ability to appropriate future funds is still up to the council that sits at that point. I know it's more information you ever wanted to know, it's more than I ever wish I knew.
That is like cross purposes, because you've signed an agreement for a 3-year lease, or 3-year commitment that you've had to capitalize. And then you, on the other hand, you say that future councils can say no.
Yep.
That is really backwards.
It is, and it's always been this little carve out. And typically, a little carve out like that saying we'll make the payment if we want to would cancel the entire agreement. But because governments, because we cannot bind a future council that sits and appropriates a budget, they accept it as something that's outside their control.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is it common for software to have multi-year contracts?
It is.
Especially the big software, yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Not like,
Actually, it's not.
Microsoft 365, that's something.
Even that, there's a 3-year agreement.
There can be.
We had them agree to not hold us to it, that we'll just pay them as we go.
It saves money. You pay.
And these software agreements as well, they're not very amenable to changes. We give it to our city attorney and it says we're going to blah, 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 hold them harmless and indemnify them forever. And we say that that's really bad. We can't do that unless they're great to use our software. So they're not amenable to change. However, I'm hopeful that they will put some caveats in there that will allow us to get this stuff out of there because I hate capitalizing future service. And like I said, we've had this software for 27 years. It's not like this 40,000 has anything to do with licensing the software. That's all future service they're going to provide. And if we stop paying, they just say you can't use our software anymore. It's not like this agreement they're going to come after us for past licensing fees. It's just not going to happen. But Anyway, we don't write rules, we just follow them, and until this is changed, kind of expect some of these in the future, if that's okay.
Okay.
It has to be okay. We too are bound by the rules.
Now we can talk about a really small one. $1 million, request to appropriate $1 million of electric reserves, this is a big deal, to remove sediment at Second Dam.
Yay.
It'll allow us to provide future hydropower. And Mark is here if you have any questions.
Yeah. Why don't you just address that a little bit, the need for that, again, given a situation where we're sort of implementing electric surcharges every month, folks may be wondering why we're spending, $1 million in reserves for this project. And this is Second Dam, not Third Dam.
Right, Second Dam.
Again.
We have more generation capability at Second Dam. We have about 7 megawatts. And last year, we struggled keeping those running because we had this biological mulching material that kept coming down and plugging off our screens. And essentially our sediment's full. So we struggled. In fact, at some points in time during the runoff last year, we shut our production off because we just couldn't keep the screens clear.
Because if the sediment gets into the equipment, it ruins the equipment, right?
Yeah, and this stuff won't even get to the equipment, it just plugs off the screens. So we're hoping to get this done before runoff. That's going to be a coin toss if we can get an RFP and get a company out here to do it, but either way, we want to do it.
Do we have to have any federal permit? I mean, I know Third Dam, we had to have all kinds of permits.
Oh, that's another part of this whole thing. We've got to have buy-off with the Forest Service and FERC and their NEPA processes, and we've kind of gone back and forth with them. This is part of our maintenance stuff. And they're like, well, you haven't done it for like decades. We're kind of working through all that now. We don't have something in place to allow us to do this more often.
At least if the money's appropriated, they can go ahead if they get it done. I mean, it might end up being, what would that be, a carry forward or just not to next year if it can't be done until next year?
Right.
But
How deep will that little pond be now?
I can't remember how many thousands of cubic yards 16,000 cubic yards they want to remove. Then there's this whole thing that the Forest Service they don't want to let us, we were going to use the material for landfill capping, but that's the Forest Service's dirt and they want it back. They also would like us to store it, but they also like us to haul it.
Then they can do the removal.
Yeah, they hold all the cards, so that's another negotiation that we're working on, to hope that they can share a little bit of that.
It's their dirt.
I wanted to say, it's your dirt, get it out of my
Yeah,
lawn.
that's right.
The argument could be made that it's not their dirt.
I know, but if you start that argument, then the process just gets longer and longer.
So what do you estimate we would be able to generate if we get that cleaned up then?
7.
Well, yeah, this
Consistent ones.
runoff looks to be stellar, right? We're gonna have lots of water in the river, so we should be able to run those at every nameplate if we can keep the water going through. So we really would like to have that issue.
I have a bunch of coffee filters at my house with this.
Yeah.
Keep the
At a-
space there.
I already called you.
To generate more electricity, is there a payback on this $1 million?
$100 a
Well,
megawatt.
I mean, when the megawatts are up in the $1,000, it starts to pay for itself relatively quickly. But we love those hydros. They're, for us, for the city, that's a relatively cheap power source, even with $1 million to close 7. It's pretty hard for us. I haven't run the numbers. I should do that.
Yeah, I was going to ask the
It'd be
same
an
thing.
interesting analysis.
We did something similar for, was it Third Dam?
Well, we're in the process of that as well, but Third Dam is only about 1.5 megawatts, and it's going to cost us like $20 million to clean it out. So the payoff for Third Dam is not anywhere near what Second Dam is. So that's the one we're kind of concentrating on.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Rich? All right, any other considerations?
I would just like to make an announcement. People may be aware that there has been a warming center that opened up at St. John's in December. The initial plan for that organization was to relocate it to the Cache Valley Veterans Center in February and March, but with all of the needs of training and getting the word out, it's been determined it's going to remain at St. John's for this winter. So if you know of anybody who's in need of that immediate shelter to be in a safe, warm place, it will be continuing here in Logan at St. John's Municipal Church from 7 p.m. to 8 a.m. every night.
What is the average usage of it?
It varies. Over the time it's been open, it's served over 30 individuals, and that's individuals and families, so it's been some children and some pets. Some nights there's been nobody there, some nights there's been as many as 16.
Really?
So it just depends on the evening. And some people come one night, and some people have stayed a series of time until they're able to find permanent shelter.
So, Amy, in the report that we saw, well, the mayor shared, it said 27 adults, 3 children. It had been open 22 days, but there were 45 stay days or something like that. I couldn't figure out.
So it's taking the number of nights that taking each night, how many people had shelter and totaling that. So there could be 30 individuals, but if some of those individuals stayed more than one night, that would contribute to the higher number of days. So you have the number of individuals served, and then you have the number of days that people had service.
But it was 30 distinct individuals, again, it may have been varying lengths.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you said once there were 16, that's what, then I'm getting, like, the math just sort of goes.
Right, but some nights we've had nobody arrive for shelter.
Okay. Okay. Do you know how many nights they have actually had people?
I do not know the answer to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other considerations? Any other announcements? All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Our meeting is adjourned.
Oh, we need to, could all of the council members just stay put for a minute?